You will not be charged for this call. This call is from
Christopher.
an inmate at Monroe Correctional Complex. This call will be recorded and monitored.
Today's guest is Christopher Havens. Christopher's a convicted murderer. He's serving a 25-year prison sentence. But behind bars, his life has taken an unexpected path, one of redemption. And that redemption has come through mathematics. Now, we'll discuss this shortly, but first, let's deal with the backstory. Look, this isn't a crime podcast, and it's not my intention to explore forensic details, but it is important, I think, not to ignore the severity of what happened. In 2010, Christopher shot dead a 25-year-old man named Randon Robinson, leaving his body in a Washington state forest. Christopher was 30 years old at the time. He was addicted to methamphetamine. He takes full responsibility for what he did. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and has accepted his punishment. In fact, much of what Christopher is doing now, what we're about to discuss in the podcast, seems like an endless quest to make amends for a debt that he says can never be fully repaid. We'll touch on this again later in the interview. Now, as you've probably already figured out, I'm talking to Christopher by telephone. We're speaking in 20-minute chunks because that's when the prison phones cut out. The sound quality is not ideal, of course, but there are captions on the YouTube version of this episode if you want to check that out. Hey, Christopher, it's Brady.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm pretty good.
Whereabouts are you? Like, what's the environment you're in at the moment? You're in a phone room or something, are you?
No, well, the way it works is kind of how you see in the TV, where we have this big area, this big open area, and there's all these rooms or cells. There's kind of like a common area where everybody congregates, and then there's a few phones, and that's pretty much it. The phones are in the middle of the mix.
In the movies and on TV, it can usually get pretty hostile over who gets to use the phones and stuff like that.
Yeah, so fortunately, I've worked myself into a place where it's a little bit more relaxed. You know, I don't enjoy playing the prison games, and I've worked hard to get to where I'm at. So I'm fortunate to not have to go through that.
Can I ask you a couple of questions about before prison, mate? There's a couple to sort of learn a bit more about you.
Sure, go ahead.
As a boy, as a youngster back in your school days, what were you like, and what were you like at mathematics?
I was just kind of an awkward kid. I didn't really have a good time socially. I was always trying to impress everybody to fit in. I had a hard time fitting in. And mathematically, I don't remember anything specific other than that math was not one of the subjects that I was, anxious about. I never liked social studies or PE, but mathematics was never one of those. But I don't remember being very good at it. My mother used to tell me that I would tutor people 2 grades ahead of me, and it's from so long ago that so many things have happened, and I've abused myself so much in between there that I just can't remember.
Do you remember what you aspired to be? Like, obviously before things took some unfortunate turns, did you have like a goal or a dream or anything?
I never had any goals before I came in here. I was just kind of living life day to day. I guess that's a little bit of a part of, the problems that I was facing. I kind of view the underlying problems that got me in this place as like an overwhelming need to try to fit in with the rest of the people. And I think I spent most of my life trying to do just that. And it ended up setting me in the same, groupings as people who were causing problems. There was a lot of moving around in my life because of my parents were in the military, and so I would uproot as soon as I started to make some solid friends, and then, I'd have to do it all over again. And so it was always this constant trying to feel accepted, and it just navigated me into all the wrong places. And before I knew it, that was my lifestyle.
I mean, now that you have, we're going to come to this later, obviously, but now that you've learned that you have this aptitude for mathematics, I'm sure you look back at a lot of things with regret, but is that one of the things that you didn't kind of dig into that mathematics early on?
Yeah, I always wonder what would have happened if somebody would have fed me some number theory, or somebody would have showed me some of the mathematics that today I would consider to be beautiful. Or if I would have stuck with it. I always wonder what would have happened, because life is so much different, and everything that I was looking for in my life back then is, everything that I had pales in comparison to even, what I have now.
Yeah.
Which is odd coming from somebody inside of a prison, but that's the reality.
Yeah.
Everybody, I think, takes for granted that a lot of the people out in society are actually inside of a prison themselves. And I guess when I finally, was able to forgive myself and accept myself for who I was, and when I finally found something where I can live around this beauty that I see, or, build a life around this thing that I'm passionate about, and I just, everything just kind of took a beautiful tint, and life just changed.
When you first, you've been sentenced, right, and you're starting this incredibly long sentence for a terrible crime. You haven't found mathematics yet, right? You're just at the start of this prison term.
Yeah.
How are you thinking you were going to pass the time? Where did you think you were going to find purpose and meaning before the mathematics? What were you thinking? I'm going to get really fit, or I'm going to read lots of books, or this is just going to be like,
no.
What were you thinking then?
I didn't have purpose and meaning. So when I first came to prison, all I knew was what I'd seen in the movies, and all of my friends telling me, the first thing you do to go to prison is you find the biggest guy and you punch him in the face. And so that was my mentality. And when I came to prison, my dad was telling me, you want to be a clownfish or you want to be a shark? And I said, in my mind, I was, I don't want to be a clownfish. And so I just started playing these prison games, and I fell in with the wrong, type of people. And I had thought originally that if, I was serving such a long sentence that I would want people to leave me alone. And so I just figured after all this, watching all these movies for my life, that if I did something crazy enough that they would leave me alone and not want to mess with me.
Yeah.
And so I landed myself in the hole, and that's kind of where it all started. I didn't have any purpose, and, there was no goal, but that was it. That was actually kind of the turning point in my life.
How did you land in the hole?
It's a little complicated. There's a lot of politics inside a prison, especially when you go to like a very maximum security prison in the United States. If you go to one of those places, you're expected to do some sort of, they call it putting in work, where you carry out some act of violence to kind of show what you're made of, or to earn your stripes.
Okay.
And if you don't, you become the target. And so knowing I had to do this sooner or later, I wanted to do it in such a way that nobody would want to ask me again.
Right.
And, so I just kind of tried to fit their criteria of what was not to be tangled with, and it got me in a lot of trouble, and just it didn't have the effect at all. It had actually the opposite effect. Everybody saw that I was willing to be, somewhat of a loose cannon, and then they all wanted to recruit me, which was actually the opposite of what I was trying to accomplish. And yep, that was that.
Tell me about how it turned different, though. It sounds like it was this time in the hole where actually you found the light at the end of the tunnel. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. In the hole, it's loud. You can't see anybody. You're in your own room. It's just a small concrete room with a light that's on 24 hours a day, big old fluorescent light. And people go mad in there, and they're slamming, they're kicking the walls, kicking the doors, flooding their rooms. It's pretty intense. And so after several weeks of that, I would just kind of, play puzzles, do Sudoku, or I'd work out. And I started noticing, the patterns of everyday life around there, where you'd see the guards walking through in certain intervals at certain times a day, and like the nurses or, other people. And I noticed this gentleman coming in every day for the last few weeks, and he was going door to door, sliding envelopes under people's doors, and there were these big manila envelopes, and it caught my attention. It made me really curious. And I remember one of those days I just asked him, I said, "Hey, what's in those envelopes?" And he didn't actually answer me. He just slid one under my door. And inside the envelope was just a bunch of math. It was basic math, like pre-algebra and math for the trades. But I hadn't done any sort of education for, I want to say since, 10, 15 years prior to that. And so I just kind of soaked it up. And it was like everything I got out of the Sudoku puzzles, but more. I guess the computation was, something that my mind craved without me knowing it. But I just started, completing his packets, and I'd send it back to him, and he'd send me a new one with some feedback, and I just kept on building and building, and we had been exchanging conversation around, what other types of math are out there, what is number theory and what is calculus, because I had no way of knowing any of that. He would provide stimulating conversation, and I would just keep on filling out his math packets and turning them back in and asking him more questions. And one day he sends me a kite, which is a prison correspondence, saying, Mr. Havens, you surpassed my math abilities, and I wish you luck on your journey. And, he was just a math enthusiast, but it had this meaning to me where, he's telling me that I was on some journey, so...
Who was this, Chris? Who was this person? Was he a prisoner or a visitor or a...
No, he was a employee for the educational system inside of the prison, and he was just, I guess, passing out course material, which I didn't know that I was doing any course material. It turned out that it was a math class, just like a beginner math class.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was stimulating material to do in the whole, and I realized, I was doing it all day, all night, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night solving these problems, and, I'd wake up saying, oh, I got it, I figured this one out, and I'd write it down, and I'd go back to sleep, and I'd have dreams about it, and, and then I realized, I was beginning to grow passion for my education, and it was a little strange because after several months of this, after he sent me that kite saying that that I've kind of surpassed what he had available for me, I just started buying books, and I just bought the books by brute force. I had no idea what to buy first, so I was buying books that were way above my head, way below my head. And, it was hard to find something that was in the Goldilocks zone, but, all the noise around me, they were all the people that I would used to associate with, and it just started sounding different. And I noticed right then and there that my thoughts, my values were starting to change because it was kind of becoming annoying, all of the convict mentality. And I seen it for what it was right there. I was having these cognitive changes, I think, as a result from studying mathematics. And it just kind of floored me how powerful something that's just plain good can be. And I just dedicated the rest of my time to the study of math after that. And it wasn't long after where I just kind of stood there. I remember I came to like a fork in the road, metaphorically. It was just, they have these gigantic concrete walls in this prison. And everybody sees that as a symbol of confinement. And I remember I stood up one time and I'm looking at that concrete wall, and it wasn't a symbol of confinement. It was a blank slate where, I could start over. And I realized, I have 25 years. I could do whatever I want. I could learn whatever I want. And in my mind, the heroes were like, instead of James Bond or the cowboys and Indians, you'd have, cryptographers, or they were all like wizards to me. And so I said, I want to spend my time trying to become a mathematician. And that's kind of what I did.
How did it go in the early stages? What do kind of the prison authorities think suddenly when one of their inmates is ordering in all these complicated math books?
I don't think that they really realized at first. I started ordering all these books, and they were getting rejected left and right for being used or for being outside of some strange obscure parameter that they have. And there's all these restrictions around ordering things. You have to order it from a certain type of bookseller, and the bookseller has to be established enough to where they're not in their own house, or they have to be soft cover, and they have to be this, and they have to be that, or it looked like it was used, or it was dog-eared, or something, So they were rejecting them left and right, and I would file appeals, and they were actually, when I was at that maximum security, whoever the head person was passing them through to me after I would appeal it. But then I got shipped out shortly later, and at that next institution, they were just rejecting book after book after book. And I would have my family put them in the trunk of their car so that they can try to, bring them at a visit, and it got to where that trunk was full of books that were being rejected. And they were all sentimental to me, because they're like the things that were saving my life. They were the things that had this, like, inside of those pages had this power to change the thoughts of this guy that lived a completely wretched life. And, to me, that was just like the ultimate, I don't know, it's just such a powerful thing some numbers can have to change something that I wasn't even able to change myself for so long.
Christopher has had help from the outside. Names you're about to hear include Luisella Caire and Umberto Cerruti, mathematicians in Italy who have befriended Christopher and nurtured his talent. Also Marta Cerruti, an academic in Canada.
So I told you that I started having these cognitive changes, and they just kept on coming, and it felt after a while that I was going through this emotional turmoil, like with all these, inner changes that were happening. It was like a tidal wave, and so I put myself into a program to try to build tools for this. And meanwhile, these books keep getting rejected, and I was studying in like a sterile environment where it felt like, I was around this thing that I loved so much, but I couldn't see the things around me. It's almost like sitting in a classroom with the teacher behind you on the board, writing out this beautiful mathematics, and it's there, and you see the book in front of you, but you can't see what's on the board. You can't see those added little nuggets of beauty, and so I ended up writing. This is when I started studying a little bit of number theory, just basic algebra, really, groups, rings, fields, and I wrote to the Annals of Mathematics to ask them for a subscription, and I let them know, where I was at, and I was curious to know if they had any people that they can put me into contact with, and they had politely responded that they felt like it might have been a little bit over my head, their journal, because it's kind of for career mathematicians, and which was true at the time. I didn't understand a bit of it, and they also sent me a bunch of books, some of them by Devlin. They also sent me Flatland, or an annotated version of Flatland, which was wonderful. And, at the time I didn't know any math magazines existed, so I didn't think to try to find something more at my level, like, Math Horizons or Mathematics Magazine. So I just kept on studying, and I started reading the books that they sent me, and a couple months later I got a letter from a lady in Italy, Luisella Caire. And she just started mentoring me. It was wonderful because we would exchange these letters where I would tell her about all these different maths from the books that I was reading or my studies, and, we just kind of talk about mathematics. She'd share culture with me, and it was one of the most powerful experiences because I was finally able to interact with somebody mathematically. Here, when I tried to engage somebody, I had been reprimanded because I should have been studying, these prison politic things, and that was kind of something that drove me away from that lifestyle even more. It was just that a lot of people are so unsupportive of, anybody that are trying to go a different direction than the grain inside prison. So when I became in contact with the people in Italy, Luisella, she just started feeding me culture and, showing me these little aspects of community. She was that first link into the community that I didn't know I needed, but it opened up a completely different aspect of the world to me. And it just lit a fire.
I want to ask you about the paper you had published, because I think that's a really interesting thing that happened. Can you tell me how it came about that you became a published mathematician?
Actually, it was Luisella's method of teaching me was never to, she just mentored me, actually, I should say. When I would have problems in mathematics, she would send me material to research the topic instead of just giving me the answers. And that had always been the way we would exchange mathematics. I would show her these long threads of thought of mine, and instead of saying, yeah, well, this is what you do here, she would instead send me research articles or chapters from specific books around that topic that would kind of lead me down a rabbit hole a little further and further to get me to explore the topic and eventually land on the answer myself. And that's kind of how I started studying continued fractions. She would share all this wonderful number theory with me, and I would always explore it because it was new and it was wonderful. And I fell in love with continued fractions. And there was this one continued fraction whose partial denominators form the sequence of natural numbers, 1, 2, 3. It's a ratio of Bessel functions. There's no actual name for the number, but Karsten Elsener and I started calling it the braid. But it equals like 1.433. But I was struck by how all these beautiful continued fractions whose partial denominators form these really neat patterns would have these really elegant, explicit, finite forms that you could write them in, like E or, pi or whatever. So I was on this quest to just solve this continued fraction to figure out an explicit and finite way to express it. And I guess it took me a year to learn that there was no solution in the terms that I was looking for, but in the process I started trying to solve like a general case, and I ended up uncovering solutions to families of Hurwitz continued fractions that would give all of the convergent. And at that time her husband seen it, Umberto Cerruti, and we just kind of started working together at that point. And he suggested a research where we investigate what happens when you apply a linear fractional transformation to it. So I did, and after another year or so, I started sending results, and we just began collaborating at that point because some of the results that I was sending were new. And I guess I found like that niche that I think every person who studies mathematics to any degree of seriousness finds, where you can kind of go down a rabbit hole and get lost, where textbooks or nothing matters. It's all kind of locked there in your head, and you're just following your own thread because sometimes there is no material to pull information from, and that's that one little spot for me. And we just started studying these leaping convergence, so these Hurwitz continued fractions.
How did it feel to have a mathematical paper published? Like, it must have been amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. To be honest, ever since I started getting in contact with Louis Ella, I had these surreal moments. It was actually ever since I started studying mathematics, but my life just started having, these things happening to me that were surreal. And I knew it was because of, my involvement in mathematics doing something good. And it never failed. Something else would happen that was just so powerful that I just couldn't quite believe that it was happening. And, at the time, my mother and I, we talk all the time, and she was like always behind all of my interactions, especially email interactions, because she used to help me with all of my correspondences. We don't actually have the internet here. So I'd ask her, I'd say, hey, is this really happening? She says, yeah, I think so. And I would just kind of, it was one thing after the other, but when the paper was coming out, I said, I don't want to believe it, because if I do, something's going to happen and it's going to get in the way of it. And we just kept on working, and we submitted the paper. And it was surreal for me too, because I got to see the referees, chewing it and spitting it out, and it going back and forth. And, it got rejected from a few journals at first, but it was wonderful to watch it evolve from the state where we submitted to the state where it got accepted. And when it got accepted, it was just this whole new feeling inside of my heart where I was like, this is the life that I could have just by studying math. And if this life is already making me feel so full of, joy and love inside of a place like this, then I'm in 100%. I'm in. Can't get rid of me.
Do you keep a copy of the journal like in your cell or anything?
Yeah, I keep a copy of it in my room, but I also I still use it when I'm doing current research. We're actually extending the research today. Stefano Barbaro, Nadir Muru, and Karsten Elsener, a gentleman in Hanover who also researches a lot in leaping convergence. And so we're getting together and we're defining this concept called natural leaping convergence. And we're adding to it, and it's exciting because this is a different feel. I have a little bit more experience, and we're moving at breakneck speeds with respect to what I'm used to, and it's wonderful. I don't know, it's a type of connection where you can build friendships and have social interactions that lead to expanding our wealth of human knowledge, and there's no real words for that. I think there's That's the most powerful thing that I can, that I can think of, and it's just such a beautiful aspect of the math world.
Have you ever found mathematicians and people unwilling to work with you because of the stigma of being a prisoner?
Yeah, in a sense. I mean, what was weird is when the paper came out, there was a lot of claims made on the internet. There was a lot of people that just started piggybacking off of other articles. And, oh, man, there was like a claim that somebody made about that I solved an ancient math problem, which is completely not true.
Right.
And then some other person took that and piggybacked and then extended the exaggeration further that I was solving problems that Euclid himself couldn't solve. And then people started calling me a genius, which I'm definitely not. And it made it really difficult because either the people that I started coming into contact with in the math community they were under the impression that I was some genius, and so that they were communicating with me on a whole nother level that I wasn't actually equipped to. It was damaging. Or a lot of people I come in contact with. Every once in a while, I'll come in contact with somebody who's just an extreme elitist. It's unintentional, but I think my personality kind of clashes with them, and I find that I just kind of embrace the people who are embracing inclusivity a little bit nicer, or hue and flourishing, because one of these guys is, we started interacting about a topic that was close to me, and he learned that I'm not formally educated, and it just rubbed him the wrong way, and he wanted to convey after that nothing but, you should be waiting to research. You shouldn't be doing any of this. And I said, well, what if it's just something that kind of comes out in my heart that I can't really, like if I'm sitting in front of a pen and paper, just trying to enjoy, mathematics and have fun and just express myself, I'm not going to stop doing it because you say that I have to have some specific education involved.
If you care to look it up, Christopher's paper is entitled On Non-Linear Leaping Convergence of a Linear Fractional Transform of Hurwitz Continued Fractions. Christopher's modest. He's embarrassed by some of the media hyperbole that has surrounded this paper. He hasn't solved some ancient riddle or anything like that, despite what you may read. But to my untrained eye, it still looks pretty advanced and impressive. Let's deal with the prison math project, because obviously that's a pretty amazing thing you've been involved with as well. Can you tell me why and how that came into being?
Well, historically it started in 2015 as a result of the prisons rejecting so many of my books. Louiselle and I were exchanging correspondences once, and, it was a bummer because she was sending me her own manuscripts and books written by her colleagues, and they all had value to me. And I was crushed when they were rejecting them, and I told her, almost in joking, that I said, you know what, I'm going to move institutions, and I'm going to infiltrate their educational system by starting a math program, and I'm going to build a library, and I'm going to get those books. So we just started planning this math program where we can actually solve a couple problems. We can, build a library to use the books, but we can also create a space for peer interactions, which I've never had.
It's just like the Shawshank Redemption, the prison film, where he starts a library.
And there's some similarities to it. So we started this program, and I remember going through all this red tape, and after so long, I'm sitting in this office with this prison official, and he calls me up there, and he says, he's typing on his computer, and he says, hey, so what are you going to call this thing? And I felt so, like I was taken back because I hadn't thought of a name for it. And I said, do you need the name right now? And he says, yeah, I'm on the computer. I'm emailing this lady, and she needs it right this minute. And I said, and I just said the first thing that popped to my head, and it was the Prison Mathematics Project. And I knew right there. He kind of grunted. He said, that's good. I was like, yeah, it is good. And the name stuck, and so we had this program that took off, and it started, there was a lot of really wonderful, we would go in this classroom, and we would just kind of like express our love for mathematics by teaching these concepts in self-contained, sessions. And I would always put, sequences on the board for people to solve, and I would do all these things. And after a while, it just started becoming like a community. You would have these people that would see each other on the breezeway in the middle of this prison, and instead of turning the other cheek because of our differences or our, they would interact with each other. And so it started building community. And it was so wonderful to see that, meanwhile, the officials here there were staff members that were just fighting me to get this program shut down because it was causing them to have to work a little bit of extra hours, or an extra half hour actually, but it was too much for them, and so they fought at an administrative level with me, and they eventually won out. So I just started using the Prison Mathematics Project as a way to hold these events inside of prison. So that's kind of how I did the first Pi Day thing, where I figured, I'm just going to invite everybody in the math world that I know, and if I get lucky, maybe one of them will show up. Invited everybody I knew, and every single one of them said, yeah, let's do this. We're coming.
Yeah.
And including all of my friends in Italy, and it was just this whole almost magical experience. I had all of my biggest influences coming under one roof in this prison on this one day.
Yeah.
And the prison administration was so mad at me because I didn't stay in my lane. I invited people without their permission, which isn't entirely true. I had permission from one of the staff members, but since he was helping me, I didn't give them his name. You find somebody that gives you support, so you want to continue that support by not getting them in trouble. So I bit the bullet, and the event went without a hitch. And because it went without a hitch, I did not get in any trouble. But they were pretty strict on me the next year. After COVID hit, we weren't even able to hold any events inside of the prison. Everything shut down. Education inside prisons came to a screeching halt. All of prison programming, they started quarantining everybody or cohorting. The prison was segregated by our units, and it shut everything proactive down. It shut all these self-help things. This is the time right around where the journal article had been published, and Umberto's daughter, Marta Cerruti, wrote an article in The Conversation about me that went viral. And in it, she asked me, well, what do you plan to do when you get out of prison? I said, well, I'd like to launch the Prison Mathematics Project as a nonprofit entity and provide it for people across the United States. And this person had read the article, and he was so inspired that he reached out to me and said, I would love to help you with that. And he started talking about reentry and recidivism and all these topics that are pretty sophisticated topics. And I felt at the time that, I was talking to some college-educated gentleman, and it turned out that at the end of his email, he had indicated that he was in high school drama class. I was like, oh. So I said, unfortunately, man, I said, I don't know if I could work with you. You're young. But I had sat on that for a while and thought about it real hard, and I had just kind of pictured for a moment that he's probably experiencing the same type of limitations that I experience in here by people not taking him serious because of his age, where people a lot of the times don't take me serious because of my incarceration. So I emailed him back, and I said, if we get your parents on board, if your family is, if there's a complete transparency going, like, I would be willing to, explore this with you. And so we did. And we ended up starting this nonprofit organization. And, the more we worked on it, the more people started jumping on board. And we just built this program around the limitations of the pandemic so that we could offer educational experiences and mentorship to people without actually having to come inside of the prisons in such a way that, all of their information, all of their personal address information and whatever is secure, so that there's no risk. Also, there's no risk of COVID. And it just kind of took off. It just started growing with a mind of its own. And we started having all these people in the math community just jumping to help. And prisoners started hearing about this. And we're getting letters from all these prisoners across the United States saying, where have you guys been? I've been studying, and I've had no idea where to go next and what to do, and this is what I love to do, and I found that there's a lot of people that have a similar story to myself.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Look, I'm afraid this is what prison phone calls are like, but don't worry, Christopher will phone back shortly. But while we have a second, I will point out that schoolboy who contacted Christopher was Walker Blackwell, and he remains a co-director of the Prison Mathematics Project.
We get these letters every once in a while from these guys that are saying that, hey, I've been studying mathematics. This is what I do. This is what I love. And I have no idea where to go next. And I want to be involved. They convey how they want to be involved in something bigger, but they don't know how to reach for it and how to obtain it. And they don't have these solid goals because they don't actually know what goes underneath their feet as far as the foundation, and it's just a wonderful thing to be able to start to connect these people with real mathematicians and educators and just members with the math community. Because what we do is we don't actually teach people mathematics from the ground up. We expect people to be studying on their own already. And we work as kind of a simulation of what Louisella was giving for me, a mixture maybe of what the older gentleman in the hole and Louisella did. Our mentorships provide prisoners with support, and we teach them about community and culture of mathematics, and we push them to go a step further towards making contributions to society during this time of their incarceration. So the idea is that having these transformational experiences myself and how powerful they were and how they lit this fire inside of my heart, I want to share it. And I want to give other people that because I know that that's kind of what led to my walk on a path of desistance from crime.
What do other prisoners who aren't into mathematics and like prison guards and that think of all this, like when they see what you're up to?
This is kind of a funny question because I have a little bit of a reputation of being a little weird in that respect. We don't have a lot of the things that you guys have out there in the community, like a blackboard. So there have been times where the inside of my room has been covered in paper, in the inside, almost gift wrapped, where I'd just be standing on my toilet trying to reach the equation up top, and carry the one or whatever the heck, and you'd have some prisoner or a guard walk by and just see what the heck is going on inside the room and be like, what in the hell is going on in there? And it would freak people out. Or for like these events, I'd be memorizing digits of pi, like thousands of digits of pi. I remember for the 2017 Pi Day event, we were doing a contest, and I had memorized 1,111 digits of pi. And to do that, I had to walk around here spouting digits of pi to myself. And I was doing something productive, but in my mind, and these guys, all they saw was this guy rambling numbers, talking to himself, walking back and forth up the tier. Or I'd be, when I study, I memorize definitions so that I don't have to refer to them in the book all the dang time. And it just kind of gives me a different, type feel for when I'm studying. If I memorize definitions, I kind of lock it in my head a little bit differently than when I'm just normally studying. So I will walk outside of my room and I'll just kind of do laps on the pier where I memorize definitions for a while, or just things. And it kind of a lot of people see that, and there is a lot of crazies around here. So I imagine a lot of people thought I was crazy.
Have you developed other interests and hobbies, or have you just become a 100% math nerd?
Well, my buddy Amit tells me that I'm like a mathematical monk, but I do kind of have a few things. I draw, although my drawings are mathematical also. But I like to do ink drawings, and I have this really strange application of I thin the ink out using a chemical that's available to me in prison, and I kind of make different hues of this one kind of pen that we can buy off of our commissary, and I come up with these drawings with, it looks like several different colors, but it's all from the same pen, and I just kind of paint it on there. So I like drawing. I don't know, organizational stuff is probably the other thing. I love having my hands on as many moving parts as possible. It's just something about when it all comes together, it's magical. And it's a personal challenge to juggle all these all these logistical pieces and put them all together in such a way that music happens, and it's so fulfilling.
Do you ever wonder what would have happened in your life if you hadn't been imprisoned, if you hadn't committed that terrible crime and gone to prison? Because I know you were having a lot of problems with drugs and things like that.
Yeah.
What do you think would have happened?
I think that I would have either still been out there doing the exact same thing, or I would be dead. I have mentioned this a few times that, well, I don't want you to get the wrong impression that I think that what I did helped me in any way, because it didn't. But the actual state of being in prison is probably the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because it helped me to change the person that I was and to see these things that I was doing. After maybe year 2, year 3 at the latest, I started examining the things, the behaviors that really led to a lifetime of making bad decisions. Just what in my life kind of was the root of the reason why I'm here today. And I would have never examined that type of thing. And I surely wouldn't have this ability to see the beauty in all things had I not found mathematics. In other words, had I not come to prison, because I was just too caught up with myself, I think, and I was too caught up with what everybody else thought of me to actually, I just, there was no time in my life where I had the common sense to pull my head from my butt long enough to get the real picture.
Do you often think about when you're finally released from prison, what you want to do, what you want your life to look like when you're no longer incarcerated?
Yeah, actually, I used to make these goals in prison, and I'd come up with them so fast that I decided at one point that I thought I'd try to start my career while I was in prison. And I started doing that recently. I became the executive director of the Prison Mathematics Project, except I decided that I would work while I'm here. I would work for free and just kind of do this as, something that I enjoy doing anyway. So this is kind of part of it. I always want to have a big active role in the organization because it's helping so many people and we're expanding in an incredible way. But to be 100% honest, and I know this is going to sound a little silly, but Erdős had it right, man. I just want to live a life of, surrounded by mathematics at all times, where whatever I'm doing is just kind of contributing in some way, where my social interactions help people instead of, have no meaning. So I believe that when I get out, I'm going to continue my work in the Prison Mathematics Project. We'll have expanded probably many times since then, and I just hope to continue research. I want to throw events, and I want to attend events, and I want to talk at events and, share in any way my story that can help people to not make the same mistakes that I had. Or, if I can inspire people to do wonderful things, then that's also a plus. But that's kind of the work I want to do. I want to continue the diversification and popularization of mathematics.
Christopher, prisons have a few roles in our society. One of them is rehabilitation, and you seem to be a really good example of that. Another one is punishment, the taking away of freedom as a punishment for crimes committed. How do you reconcile those two with what you're trying to do with the project? Because part of this is kind of, giving more freedom and empowering and connecting prisoners with the outside community, which seems to be rub against the punishment, but it also is doing a lot of good for the rehabilitation. Do you ever see any clash there or not?
Well, no, I don't see clash there, but there are people who feel a little animosity towards it. But their idea is that justice might not be being served in the most appropriate way. But having lived here, I say this: what is justice? Is justice the act of serving 25 years in prison in misery so that they become a better criminal and get out and make the same or worse decisions? Or is justice the act of finding a way to forgive yourself so that you can become the best version of yourself and not make the same mistakes, so that you get out as a different individual, somebody who's no longer a threat to society? I think that's justice. I think justice is somebody who can fit back into society in a way that is complementary. And I think justice happens when true change happens within the individual that caused the disruption in the first place. So our program uses that idea. What we want to try to achieve is a community-based system of restorative justice so that the community becomes a factor in the rehabilitation of these individuals. And the idea behind that is that if I'm in prison and I all of a sudden decide that, hey, you know what, this lifestyle is not working out for me, I need to change. I need to become a better person. And So now I'm under this mindset that I want to change who I am and change my lifestyle. But who do I have to model into? Where am I going to go? What lifestyle do I go into? Because all I see around me is the convict mentality. So how am I supposed to model into a new lifestyle if I don't even know what's out there? And so if I have this passion for something and I'm given this ability to build a life around this passion for higher education, and in this case, mathematics, well, then through the Prison Mathematics Project, we give them that first link into the community, that one link. And they have this one opportunity to build a relationship with somebody in the community. And if that person does really good while they're incarcerated, and if that mentor decides that that person's interactions were fruitful and full of positive personal growth, and if they, have built a dynamic with them, then they have the opportunity to take that mentorship out into the real world.
Earlier on, you mentioned your parents and your family. I imagine when you went to prison, that must have been a terrible time for them when you were sentenced. How do they feel now that you're a published mathematician, you're the executive director of this project, you've really turned things around? What's been your family's reaction?
At first, my mother didn't believe when the detectives called and said that I was in prison for murder because it didn't fit with the way I was on the inside, and I had just been down this road of making all these incredibly bad decisions, and she just couldn't believe it. Even after I first became incarcerated, I was still just kind of a knothead. And then when, I started finding mathematics, I think all these changes started happening, and they became so evident. And I had mentioned that she was such a presence in my life already, her and my daughter Hope, that they got to see everything happening in real time with me. And they saw all these changes beginning to occur. And, I've had a lot of conversations about this with them, in fact, and it's just like a wonderful thing to them as well. And I've even built a relationship with my father again, who I am assuming felt that I smeared the family name. And, at this point in time, I think that he's no longer in that mindset. So it's actually strengthened my relationship with my family just due to all the efforts that I've been making with myself and with them. It's just kind of a different, I don't know, it's night and day.
How do you want to be remembered? What do you want your legacy to be now?
Well, I think, I don't have a big attachment of being remembered. But if I do, I would like to be remembered for my push for a diversification of mathematics to this prison atmosphere. I want to change the culture in this place so that it becomes a breeding ground for productivity. I would like to redefine what productivity looks like in prisons, and I would like to smash this idea of the convict mentality and turn justice into something that is beautiful. That's what I would like to be remembered by.
Christopher has never been in touch with the family of the man he murdered, Randon. He's not allowed to contact them, but he does think about Randon daily, and he refers to his new life of education and research in mathematics as repaying an infinite debt.
I know this is going to sound really silly probably to you, but I have this feeling that's inside of, you know that passion when you're studying something and you can feel it in your heart, right? You have this singing feeling. And I've just been trying to do well enough and make that feeling sing loud enough that it's heard. I know that sounds strange, but I just want my actions to, I just think that my actions, if I do well enough, will reach the people. And, I just hope that they can see that at least the person that caused them this pain is not sitting inside of a prison trying to become a better criminal.
Christopher Havens is now 42 years old. He's been locked up since he was 30. The best case scenario could see him released in 4 to 6 years, but it may be longer. In the meantime, he hopes to grow the Prison Mathematics Project across the US, into Canada, and maybe into the UK. The program's main purpose remains finding kind of mathematical pen pals or mentors for people who are behind bars, linking them up with the sort of people who have helped Christopher flourish. There are also plans, when appropriate, to perhaps get teachers and mentors into the prisons themselves. The The project is a non-profit organisation. I'll include some links in the episode notes so you can find out more. The Numberphile podcast is made possible by the Mathematical Sciences Research Institute. You can also support us at patreon.com/Numberphile. I'm Brady Harron, and we'll be back again soon with another episode of the Numberphile podcast.